Did you know that the deadliest earthquake ever killed over 800,000 people in China in 1556? Or that a massive cyclone in 1970 took 500,000 lives in just one night? And have you heard about the volcanic eruption that buried Pompeii, leaving people frozen in ash as they tried to escape? Natural disasters have caused unbelievable destruction, changing the world in ways we can still see today. In this video, we'll uncover some of the most shocking and unforgettable disasters in history. Get ready to be amazed, and maybe a little scared, by the power of nature. The term natural disaster originates from the Latin word disastro, meaning ill-starred event, a phrase that perfectly captures the devastation these events bring. But natural disasters are far more than just unlucky occurrences. They're Earth's way of reminding us who's in charge. Take Noah's flood, for example. Did you know that nearly every ancient culture has a story about a great flood? From the Bible's tale of Noah to the Epic of Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia, these stories may have roots in real events. Massive floods caused by rising sea levels after the Ice Age. Imagine entire cities disappearing underwater, leaving survivors to wonder if the heavens were punishing them. Or consider the Minoan eruption of Santorini around 1600 BCE. It wasn't just a volcanic explosion. It was so massive that it wiped out the Minoan civilization and might even be the origin of the Atlantis myth. Imagine an eruption so powerful that it darkened the skies for years, turning day into night and leaving ancient people terrified of what the gods had unleashed. But these weren't the only moments in history when nature showed its overwhelming power. In 79 CE, Mount Vesuvius erupted near Naples, Italy, causing a catastrophic disaster. The eruption began around midday, sending a massive cloud of ash and pumice into the sky. Over the next 18 hours, Pompeii and nearby towns like Herculaneum were buried under meters of volcanic material. Many residents were caught off guard, and it's estimated that about 2,000 people in Pompeii lost their lives, primarily due to pyroclastic flows, fast-moving currents of hot gas and volcanic matter that caused instant death from extreme heat. What's even more chilling is that life in Pompeii was frozen in time. Archaeologists have found bread still in ovens and humans and pets preserved in their final moments, revealing an eerie snapshot of daily Roman life just before disaster struck. This tragedy ended lives, but it also preserved a slice of history unlike any other. Centuries later, another disaster gripped Europe, but this time it was invisible: the Black Death. This plague, which struck Europe between 1347 and 1351, was one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, killing an estimated 25 million people. Recent studies suggest that climate factors may have played a role in its spread. A period known as the Little Ice Age brought cooler temperatures and increased rainfall, leading to crop failures and famine. These harsh conditions weakened populations, making them more susceptible to disease. Additionally, climate-induced habitat changes may have driven plague-infected rodents closer to human settlements, facilitating the transmission of the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which causes the plague. Now, let's talk about the 1556 Shaanxi earthquake in China. This earthquake is actually the deadliest in recorded history. It struck in the early morning hours of January 23, 1556 in the northern part of China, specifically in the province of Shaanxi. The estimated magnitude was around 8.0, which is absolutely massive. The death toll is staggering. Around 830,000 people died, though some estimates say it could have been even higher. The quake caused widespread destruction, with entire towns and villages being reduced down to rubble. It also triggered massive landslides that buried thousands of people alive. The severity of the disaster was exacerbated by the type of homes people lived in as well. Many of the buildings being dug into soft, loose soil, which made them particularly vulnerable to collapse during the earthquake. Then, in 1815, the world faced another shocking event: the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia. It was the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history, far surpassing Vesuvius. The eruption was so powerful that it ejected massive amounts of ash into the atmosphere, blocking sunlight and causing what became known as the Year Without a Summer in 1816. Imagine living in a time when crops failed across Europe and North America because summer never truly existed. The sky stayed gloomy, temperatures were unusually cold, and food shortages became a serious problem. Tambora's eruption didn't just cause local destruction, it had global effects. In Europe, the cold, dark summer inspired eerie and gloomy art and literature. In fact, during that year, a group of writers, including Mary Shelley, gathered in a villa by Lake Geneva. Trapped indoors by the cold weather, they entertained each other by telling ghost stories. It was during this time that Mary Shelley began writing what would become Frankenstein. So, in a strange way, a volcanic eruption played a huge part in the birth of one of the most famous horror novels of all time. Meanwhile, over in Asia, the eruption caused widespread starvation. Crops failed and rice prices skyrocketed, leading to unrest in many regions. Even today, scientists study the Tambora eruption to understand how large volcanic events can impact global climate. One lesser-known detail, though, is that the ash from Tambora also created vivid, fiery sunsets for years after the eruption. Artists of the time, such as J.M.W. Turner, captured these unusual skies in their paintings, giving us a visual record of the eruption's aftermath. The 20th century witnessed the 1970 Bhola cyclone, which hit East Pakistan, now Bangladesh, in November of 1970. This cyclone is considered the deadliest tropical cyclone on record, with an estimated death toll exceeding 500,000. The storm caused massive flooding, destroyed crops, and left millions homeless. Now, let's talk earthquakes. Ever heard of the Tangshan earthquake in China in 1976? This one was brutal. It hit with a magnitude of 7.5 and killed over 240,000 people. But the worst part, many of the buildings in this area weren't built to withstand such an earthquake, so they just collapsed like a house of cards. Now, let's talk about some of the big natural disasters from the last few decades. You've probably heard of some of them. I mean, they've shaped entire regions and left scars that took years to heal. Starting with one of the worst, the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004. This was a devastating event triggered by a massive undersea earthquake off the coast of Sumatra. The quake had a magnitude of 9.1, and the resulting tsunami swept across several countries, including Indonesia, Thailand, India, and Sri Lanka. More than 230,000 people lost their lives, and millions were left homeless. The sheer speed of the waves, up to 500 miles per hour. But the worst part, there was little to no warning for most people. Since then, a lot of effort has gone into setting up early warning systems, but back then, it was simply chaos. And then, there was Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. If you've ever heard about New Orleans flooding, this is why. Katrina was one of the deadliest and costliest hurricanes in U.S. history. The storm itself was bad, but it was the storm surge and the failure of the levees protecting New Orleans that turned it into a full-blown disaster. Around 1,800 people died, and entire neighborhoods were submerged. Even today, the scars of Katrina are visible in some parts of the city. It was a wake-up call about how vulnerable coastal cities are to powerful storms. Now, let's just fast forward to the Australian bushfires of 2019 to 2020, also known as the Black Summer. It was heartbreaking. More than 18 million hectares of land were burned, and nearly 3 billion animals were affected. The images of koalas clinging to burning trees and kangaroos fleeing flames were everywhere. Thousands of homes were destroyed, and dozens of lives were lost. It wasn't just a natural disaster for Australia. It felt like the whole world was watching in horror. The fires were fueled by extreme heat and prolonged drought, highlighting how climate change is making such events more frequent and intense. But here's something interesting, and it might surprise you. While it feels like natural disasters are happening more often, some researchers argue that it's actually not true. For example, studies show that number of deaths from natural disasters has decreased over the past century. In the early 1900s, millions would die in major disasters because there was little to no preparation or warning. But today, thanks to better forecasting, technology, and disaster management, that number has dropped significantly. However, we must never forget that these events can strike at any moment. They serve as Earth's way of reminding us who's truly in charge. So, which disaster did you find the most devastating? Let us know down in the comments section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Mr. History for more interesting content.